Greetings and welcome back to another edition of Perspectives. I know I have a couple of new people on my channel, people that I imagine the teal-colored ungulate had sent this way. So in this series I talk about, just a little introduction, explanation. In my Perspective series I talk about different countries, their cultures, the political events, and whatever. This isn't the first time I've talked about the United Kingdom. In fact, the first time I did in this series, it was in fact with the teal-colored cervid. So I will be posting a link to that video in case you're interested. That is my discussion of Islam and other things in the context of the United Kingdom with teal deer. But today I'm here with my friend Nico Chomsky, who is in fact a practicing NHS doctor. And I think it's very important to talk about this because if you haven't been paying attention to the news in the United Kingdom, the NHS is literally falling apart at the seams. Mm-hmm. And this is what this show is all about, perspectives on what's going on. And I really want to find out what's going on. I think you should too. I think we're going to get some really nice insider information, and we're going to get a good, perhaps, overview of what the NHS is looking like now and what the future of the NHS is. And before I proceed, I mean, for those of you who don't know, outside of the United Kingdom or don't follow British current events, the NHS refers to the National Health Service. It is the oldest, I believe I founded in 1948, the oldest single-payer health service in the world. And for a very long time it ran pretty well, but in the last 2 decades, Nico, would you say in the last 2 decades is when it's begun to really see some problems?
I mean, from the time I came to the UK, so I would say, yeah, it will be over a decade now where...
So at least a decade there have been some substantial problems. And it might be culminating now, we don't know. So I'm going to actually give the podium to our bearded friend here, Nico Chomsky. And yeah, I mean, what the fuck is going on with the NHS?
Well, right, let's just say about what's happening right now in the NHS and the recent events that took place. I mean, over the past couple of weeks, the junior doctors, that means any doctor who's not a consultant, have been striking because of a new proposed contract that's trying to stretch the workforce even further than it actually is. And yeah, that's what's lately been happening. Doctors have been quitting left and right. Medical students who are graduating right now are traveling to Australia to practice there, or are choosing different career paths. So that's what's happening from the point of view of the doctors. Now, over the past, I would say, couple of years plus since the Conservatives took over, since the austerity measures and all that took place in the rest of Europe, the NHS has literally had a freeze of all the investment or of all the funds that were going into it. So there hasn't been an increase until very recently, where they announced they were going to put a few more funds, couple of more billion into it. The NHS, as it works right now, is overstretched with too many patients wanting too many things. Too few doctors covering all the...
Do you mind if I interject? What's an example of too many patients wanting too many things? I think you, if I recall, you gave me a very prominent example. Maybe this was a couple of years ago. A woman approached you, and this was in the emergency room, was it not? Or the trauma room, as you might refer to in the UK. And I imagine she had a vaginal yeast infection or something, right? And she only noticed it within the hour, and she immediately went to the emergency room. Now, a vaginal yeast infection, though I'm hardly an expert on that particular disease or issue, is something that can be treated over the counter, is it not?
Yeah, basically fluconazole, that's all you need, and
right.
That should treat it. And you can easily get it treated if you are to visit the pharmacist. Yeah, this woman ended up showing in the accident and emergency department. Now,
right. So it's absolutely not necessary to visit the emergency room.
It's not necessary. It's not necessary to visit.
And this kind of thing is common. It's not identical, obviously, but no. Going to the emergency room and visiting trauma doctors for apparently very minor incidents and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, You see, even patients in the UK, even people living in the UK, they don't really understand what's going on in terms of how the NHS is structured, how you're getting new doctors to cover for each job, for each specialty that exists. So there are a given number of doctors that cover the GP specialties, and there are trainee posts that need to be filled to, cover up the needs of the UK as it is. Those spots are constantly being underfilled, and due to the demand of the public, GP practices in the UK are always booked. So if, for example, I want to book an appointment for my GP, I would need to call the GP at 8 a.m. in the morning, and if I'm lucky, I might get in just enough time to find an appointment for me. It's difficult to get prospective appointments from doctors, so if you want to book and see him in 2-3 days' time, especially for your GP, it's almost impossible to get in. It's really, really difficult to actually see your GP because there's so many people and too few GP practices for the patients to go. Therefore, people end up going to A&Es even with minor problems because they have nowhere to go. And since everything's free at the point of delivery, at the point of care, then people don't care where they show up as long as they get their needs met.
Yeah. Please go on.
What I was going to say is that every job, as it is right now in the UK, so I'll talk from the point of view of the doctor right now, right? And my colleagues and how it is generally. It's not that we don't like what we do, but the job, the quality of what we're enjoying every day is starting to go down, and it has been going down for the past couple of years. So you constantly find yourself working over the expected hours, and you do that for free, right? And we knew it was going to be somehow like that anyway. But even the everyday jobs, if you are to go in, very rarely you will find every shift covered, right? So there will constantly be people missing. There might be shifts or like trainee posts or doctors who they basically can't employ enough doctors to cover for the posts that they need. And even if they are to employ every doctor and they find doctors and there are not enough doctors to go around for each specialty, especially GPs, accident emergency, psychiatry, the frontline kind of specialties that exist, they don't have enough doctors to cover for them. So even if they are to cover for the missing trainee posts, they import enough doctors from outside. That's still not going to be enough to cover for the growing demand of the public.
Now, when you say the growing demand of the public, are you potentially alluding to the possibility that there are just too many people? I mean, we know, for example, that the population of Great Britain is rising primarily through immigration. What has been the effect of immigration on the NHS?
I mean, obviously, when you have extra patients, you're going to have more work. It's going to be as simple as that. And more people coming in, you're going to have more patients, generally showing in the accident emergency departments because they still don't know how the system works in the country that they've moved in. So if they have a particular problem, they would come to the accident emergency departments, right? So that's how they generally show up. But
from what I understand is that this is, for example, one form apparently of gainful employment is being an interpreter these days because there are many patients who come to the hospital and don't speak English, and it's kind of a way of doing that, no?
Yes, absolutely. So if I'm going to have a chat or take a history from a patient, I should try and get a translator in order to cover my ass legally, right?
Right.
So I need to have a translator there. And you'll find all sorts of languages from all over the world. There has been an increase, in Eastern European, Romanian, Polish, if I'm being 100% honest. because that's since those countries moved into the EU, there has been an influx of such patients in the UK.
Is it that they're not competent in English, or they're just not sure of the medical terminology, or is it both?
It's both. Some of them come here, they move in with their families. They don't need to learn the language, or they're very young into the country, let's say, and they still don't know the language. But you know, if you are to come into the UK, you don't necessarily need to know the language or English at all, for any matter. And they just, you know, come here, and we have to have a translator if we are to assess these patients successfully. Right. It's a growing business. Yeah, translation. It's true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much neutral on this. I would imagine. I mean, I'm not British, and have no intention to return to the sunless lands anytime soon. Although I do like the sunless lands for being sunless, but I mean, this seems to me a major talking point, or at least related to a major talking point, when you hear someone like Nigel Farage with UKIP saying, well, you know, all these Eastern Europeans coming, blah, 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 blah. I mean, is this ever mentioned in the political context as well?
That's the problem. I mean, people do mention it, right? They do mention it, and doctors can occasionally mention it, although, if I'm being honest, the majority of doctors tend to be a lot more liberal in their political leanings, and you see that everywhere. Now, people do mention it, and they do, occasionally doctors will say that, you know, a lot of the problems will be solved if people had to pay a little bit in, especially with such a growing population of, you know, migrants coming into the country, right? People will say things like that, but the reality is the majority of the workload, the vast majority of the workload, are British citizens born and raised here. And if I'm being 100% honest, the majority of the workload are British citizens that have never worked a day in their lives.
Right. So I think this is illuminative, or rather illuminating to some degree, is that look, I'm not on anyone's side politically. In fact, here, I mean, everyone knows my political views. They just really depend on the context or the specific issue. But certainly, one of the points of rhetoric you'll hear from people who are anti-EU, and I actually want, it's a separate issue, I want the UK to leave, but is that, you know, all damn immigrants come and taking the welfare checks. Well, certainly they wouldn't say it that way, but the fact of the matter is, if you listen to what Nico's saying and his observations, it's what I used to observe when I was living in the UK too. The majority of people on the dole, the welfare beneficiaries, and I mean long-term welfare beneficiaries, are effectively chavs, what you might refer to in the United States as white trash, poor, unskilled, poorly educated, not so intelligent white British people. No. So
the lower social class, it's I mean, it depends to where you are in the UK, and depending to which area you have. The people that usually clog up the services, you know, the majority of the people visiting are the lower social class, the primary beneficiaries, like you're saying, yes. So now, it depends how you view this, right? There is something that will tell you that people who are on benefits are people who are unwell, therefore they would be visiting the doctor a lot more, right? And that's partly true. However, it's vastly disproportional, and you do see it. So yeah, I think one of the things that the UK has to address, first of all, right, and immigration is definitely one of them, right? The EU and stuff, I don't have a stance. I generally don't have a stance on any of these things. I'm an immigrant. I'm, you know, from somewhere in the EU. I am living here. I'm working here. I studied here.
Well, this is an interesting question I've always thought, and I mentioned it while I was having a stream with some anti-feminists, something I've been dabbling in recently, although I'm not sure I'll do too much of it in the future. But, I mean, obviously there are going to be immigrants who are unproductive and whatever, but there are going to be, obviously, immigrants, particularly from Eastern Europe, that are going to, you know, work hard, pay taxes and all that. Yeah. And you've been you've been a European immigrant in the United Kingdom for quite some time. Yeah. I've often tried to envision what happens when, Brexit is another important thing. I plan on making a video about that, guys, but bear with me on that. The referendum goes through and they say, we want out, and they get out. I mean, who knows how quickly that would happen. And you're left with, I don't know, maybe tens of thousands of, at the very least, of competent people from other places in Europe who've been in the UK and speak English and all that, pay taxes. I mean, there must be some orderly process that would happen in that case, rather than, we're kicking your asses out of here, that kind of thing.
I don't think that's likely to take place. If someone is, a working professional, is in the country, has a job, they're not likely to gonna, kick him out.
I can't imagine.
I can't imagine them kicking me out. If you understand what I mean.
No, absolutely. I don't think they're going to be. Nico, man, you see the end of this AK-47? Do you want to get to know it better? Hey, do you want some intercourse with it? Get the fuck out of my country. But I don't imagine that happening either.
Yeah.
Probably just a lot of rhetoric, but I mean, what I mean, if we want to be precise here, what really? I mean, I guess you could argue 3 decades ago, the NHS was doing reasonably well as any single payer public welfare kind of system could do. Won't be as efficient as the private sector, but decent. But let's face it, and I'm not blaming you as a doctor. I'm sure you're a fantastic doctor.
I'm all right.
Yeah, but I've had horrible experiences with the NHS. It's relatively known, and I know it sounds like hyperbole, but that if you get cancer in the United Kingdom, you better hope you have money, because you either should go to Germany or some other place because it's a death sentence. Those of you who followed the whole Thunderfoot thing with his father know about that.
Well, I wouldn't be as extreme as that. They do have a worse off mortality rate in Europe, right? I don't want to diss off all of my colleagues. I'm sure they do a brilliant job if they do see the patients in time.
I've looked at the cancer treatment in Germany seems to be superior to that of the United Kingdom.
Oh, definitely. I'm sure about that.
Yeah. And I was misdiagnosed no fewer than 4 times for a salivary gland tumor, and they said it just had something to do with my tonsils. It was a rash. I mean, I was thinking, really? In fact, if I had to self-diagnose myself and then return to a different doctor and say, this is what this is, because I Googled it. And so, I mean, a lot of people have bad experiences with the NHS, and I'm having not lived in the United Kingdom 30 years ago or 40 years ago. I can't imagine. I don't know how it was, but you must know older doctors or people who remember the so-called good old days.
It was never like this. Yeah.
Was there? Oh, so there was a point in time in the NHS's history when they were reasonably efficient, they were reasonably reliable. And
they're very efficient. If I'm being honest, like the system is very efficient. It's a badly designed system, but it works efficiently for how it's designed and for the number of doctors it has and for the number of patients it has to treat. So if you imagine this, right, from the point that you visit the GP, right? So you as a doctor visit the GP. A GP has 10 minutes. That's all the time that he has to see you. That's the dedicated time that he has to see you. Then from that point on, if he considers that he needs to refer you, we're talking specifically about cancer, he will need to refer you to the appropriate specialty for a 2-week wait. That's how it should work. From the point that the patient comes, if he has red flag symptoms, he should go for a 2-week wait, and then he should expect treatment. Now, the problem is, this is theory, right? What happens if the number of people who are supposed to have a 2-week wait are so vast you cannot have a 2-week wait anymore? Then the 2-week wait becomes a 3-week wait. It can become a 4-week wait. You can perhaps assign the tasks for nurses to see those patients first, and then a doctor would see them. Perhaps that's how you keep up with that goal. But if the system is overloaded, right, you cannot work it efficiently anymore. I mean, it works efficiently, but the targets are not met as they're met in other countries. And the problem lies in this very simple fact. One, first of all, the generation, 30 years ago, you had a different generation of people, right? We said in 1948 we had people. That's when the NHS was established. The people then were after, a Second World War. They never had free healthcare before. They were highly appreciative of it. The children of those people perhaps carried some of that attitude with them. And if you are to see patients who are older, right, they are highly appreciative of the treatment that you give them, and they use the system appropriately as to and when they need it, right? Now,
so essentially what you're saying is, it's not an unfamiliar scenario, and I think this could apply to welfare in general. People have grown accustomed to it, and effectively take it for granted, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
We see this with the welfare system too. Which is in mass abuse throughout the West, particularly in Europe, where people are getting on welfare so they can smoke joints all day rather than, they broke their leg and they can't go to the construction site for 6 or 8 weeks or whatever. And this, obviously this is essentially part of the welfare problem, because effectively the NHS is a kind of welfare. I'm not passing, any sort of moral judgment on that. I'm just saying that it's a kind of welfare, and it seems, based on your descriptions, that people are abusing it in the same sense that they abuse the kind of checks the government sends them.
I think that anyone, if they're unwell, they should go and see their doctor. If they're unwell, right? But from experience and seeing patients, not the majority, but many of the patients that you do see are frequent attenders with no problems whatsoever. People that come in for social calls to see you and just get on because they didn't have many, a lot of things to do in their time, and that's at the point of the GP. Now in A&E you have frequent attenders as well. There are people with 500 admissions. In A&E, some with more. Some people have been banned from A&E departments because they have been abusing it. And if you imagine, every time a patient crosses the A&E barrier, that costs the taxpayer money.
Well, I think it's just, it's common sense, both in politics and economics. And I forgot what I think it's, there's some major American supermarket chain, and I don't remember the name of it, but they don't provide the sort of universal health insurance, but they do give you a certain allocation of money. And they observed, I guess you could almost call it a sociology experiment, that without the sort of quote-unquote universal healthcare, people are a lot more cautious, careful, and I guess decisive, to put it one way, about going to the doctor. So if they have a common cold or something, they're just going to wait it out usually or whatever, rather than, I have the sniffles, or my vagina is itchy, or whatever. I think when everything is potentially treatable and you don't have to pay out of your own pocket, at least it seems that way, you're, frankly speaking, more willing to go in to see the doctor for virtually anything.
Yeah, especially if you don't have anything better to do.
Precisely. And I think, this is just my opinion now, this is my opinion, that this is an inevitability in any system that operates along this way. It's at some point in time, when the degree of appreciation recedes, dissipates, and indeed completely disappears with the passing of generations who were familiar with the introduction of the system, or at least the system in the earlier days. The NHS, for example, in the United Kingdom is, it's just part of life, right? I stubbed my toe, or I broke my pinky toe, I'll go to the doctor, or whatever. This seems inevitability almost. So, not saying that this is necessarily the only cause of what's going on, but it's certainly a contributing factor.
Absolutely.
And this might actually be inevitability given that kind of system.
Yeah, it is definitely an inevitability. If you have something for free, then you stop appreciating it, and then you will go and use it more, right? That's definitely something that does take place. But this was something that everyone expected. That's not really a problem, and it shouldn't have really been a problem if, for example, the number of doctors, the number of hospitals, the number of services, the number of the investment from the government grew proportionately.
Well, hold on, Nico. You're saying the government and people anticipated people abusing and overusing the system?
Of course. Doctors have been talking about it for years. Why wouldn't you expect abuse? If something turns from costing something to being free, What would you expect? If you think the example of, like, let's assume that from right now, at this point onwards, in a city in Germany where you're at, all the food in the world, all the food there would be free, right? And people should
I know basic economics, yes, of course, yeah.
It's the same principle. Why would people think any differently when it comes to their healthcare? It's human nature. No one anticipated anything else.
Right, but I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, I think it's human nature too. But if this can be anticipated, and anticipated is the point where people are going to massively abuse the system as you're describing, which costs money and time, then the system itself has to be, of necessity, if long term, not sustainable.
Yep. What do you want me to say to that? Yes.
You wave your magic doctor wand and fix it all.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. People in the UK, and especially now with the strikes that have been taking place with the junior doctors, etc., have been saying that doctors don't work hard enough. And you know the kind of hours I was doing before, right?
Dude, man, I know. I remember you were just falling asleep on the toilet with the shit still hanging out your ass. You were so tired, man.
But anyway, junior doctors do not work hard enough. Doctors are not as good as they used to be. Nurses are not working hard enough. When you actually look at the numbers and the kind of numbers of doctors that it takes to do the job, we don't have enough anyway, right? And
I once again, sorry for interrupting. I'm so stoked.
Not just that. Let me add this just for a second. Please, the litigation that the risk of litigation right now towards the doctors and everyone is a lot more. So you will take a lot longer to document something. And
we should absolutely get into that litigation risk as well. But I did want to add, or maybe theorycraft now. Many of you know I had a conversation with my friend Clive C.S. MGTOW about sort of the limits of welfare systems. And I think that, particularly with regards to the healthcare system, having talked to my friend Coltane quite frequently about that, he's a filthy commie, but I love him. The Australian system isn't too different. I think it's a question of numbers. I mean, I'm not saying the UK is overpopulated, but Australia is pretty sparsely populated given its landmass, and so it seems to work reasonably well. I think one of the contributing factors absolutely has to be just sort of sheer raw numbers of people, because we know that, for example, the Norwegian system could potentially be sustainable if they don't let in unlimited numbers of immigrants and just sort of flood the system. So part of this seems to me just a numbers game, basically. There's too many people, right?
Well, not just that. I mean, in Australia, people pay to go and see GPs. I mean,
I don't know the details. I know Coltane told me he pays to see the tooth torturer, or the dentist.
Well, people pay to see the dentist here as well. Mostly private. There is NHS.
Yeah, I pay to see the dentist here too. Far too seldom. I need to go again at some point in time. But so tell us about the risk of litigation, because in the United States this is a huge thing. Malpractice insurance, and it's what we call, United States. I don't know if you refer to it in the UK. In my country of origin, ambulance chasing. Which is to say, there was a famous case, I think, that actually went through, I believe, of some woman who allegedly had hot coffee spilt on her hand at McDonald's, which it was a claim of a first-degree burn. In any event, she's pressed a lawsuit. She sued the McDonald's and got an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite that bad, but I imagine that
no, it's not that
still
bad.
A risky thing.
No, it's not that bad. But the problem is, you're largely left alone. Any complaint that you have, right? Any litigation against you will take ages and ages and ages to resolve, right? Do I really want to work in a system where I'm working, let's say 50, 60 hours a week, right? And doctors work on average 48 hours, documented hours 48 hours, so I would say maybe 50, 52 hours, right? Do I want to work in a system that on average I'm working so many hours, I come home, I'm completely dead, I have extra work and training that I need to do, studying, things that I do for free for the NHS, audits that improve the current practice, you want to be you're doing presentations, paying for your own exams, paying for GMC memberships, BMA memberships, medical negligence memberships, and all that stuff that you need to pay for, right? Do all that, and then when it comes to it, I have patients that sue you, and then that takes over, a good portion of your life on top of that. So that's why people try to document as clearly as they can in case when that happens, you try to defend yourself, right? So that takes even longer from your time.
And it seems to me that you're very much painting a picture of not just unsustainability for the system, but many of you may or may not know, if you're from the UK, you absolutely do know, of the strikes that have been, are they still ongoing?
No, the strikes finished, so it was a
right.
two-day strike. I mean, and the BMA...
And you participated, right?
Of course, yeah.
Now, I mean, it sounds like there's just too much going on, too much pressure building up, and it seems, I guess, the perhaps inevitability, unless things can be reformed, that doctors are going to bow out. They're going to leave.
They're already leaving.
Right. They're going into other fields of medicine. I said law. You said they're going to law. They're leaving the country.
Going to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States. They're just moving out.
Right.
It was the first year ever. I remember I saw this where first of all, the number of applicants from medical school dropped, right? Following that, the number of graduates who wanted to participate into medicine, so going to medicine after graduation. So we're talking about Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery graduates who wanted to go into medicine. The majority of them didn't want to go into medicine, right? And these people cost the government, so the investment from the government is at least in the areas of $500,000 to train them to get to that point. But they don't want to go there. You can only hit a dog that many times before he turns around and bites you, right?
That's right.
So I think that's what's happening right now.
Now, I mean, we talked about some of the factors. I want to talk about this a little bit before we started the chat. I want to bring up an article from 2014 written by a professor, J. Marion Thomas, who is a surgeon, I believe, with the provocative title, provocative at least by Blue Pill standards, Why Having So Many Women Doctors is Hurting the NHS, a provocative but powerful argument from a leading surgeon. And without reading the entire article off to you, basically there's a majority of female doctors. Most of them naturally tend to go into general practice or pediatrics. And this is created, from what I understand, talking to you as well as Clive, who's well-versed in the medical field of oncology, as someone who has to deal with people in that field, a shortage of oncologists, a shortage of trauma surgeons, a shortage of, and I'll be posting a link to the article in case you want to check it out, a shortage of these really critical types of doctor or medical specialty that are just not being filled. This has contributed, for example, from my understanding, to long cancer waits if you're diagnosed with cancer. This is one, not the only, of course, but one of the contributing factors to staff shortages in the United Kingdom. Now, as most of my audience knows, if you're new here, but if you're completely new here and Teal'c sent you here and you're thinking, what is this guy talking about? As he mentioned in his maybe third to latest video, women, generally speaking, on average, tend to make different decisions when it comes to career choice. Yes. And when they become doctors, it's very often they undergo all this training, but they're not even they don't even stay there 10 years. They quit, or if they don't completely quit, they stay just part-time general practice. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but unfortunately, medicine is a very demanding, rigorous field, and if you want to have good medical care, you need people who are manning the posts, such as oncologists and emergency surgeons and trauma surgeons, stuff like that. And given, this was in 2014, this article, it's mentioned that 61% of doctors are in a certain age, they're women, part-time. And this is what the professor is arguing, that it's damaging the NHS. Now, I think this is a classic case of women not really thinking too hard about this outside of their own lives, sort of emotionally, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Becoming a doctor, spending lots of money, whether it's public or private, and then just essentially quitting or working half or even less than half the time that's expected, I think is damaging. And would you say that this is one of the contributing factors to the problems in the NHS?
I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, it is. But I mean, in the defense of the female doctors that I came across so far.
Defend the women, man.
No. It's not about being white knight at all, and you know this.
I'm just busting your balls, man. No worries.
So let's look at the problem from beginning to end, right? To get into British university, you need good A-level results. Women generally do better, right? Medicine is the most demanding out of these professions, right? Yep. So you would end up getting at least 70% women, close to that actually, 65, 70%. I'm guessing it's right about there. So 35 to 30% will be men, right? From the beginning, right? Because of equality, that's how it's going to be. And, you know, they got their grades. They want to work as doctors. They want to do this. They should do it, right? Then they finish med school, and that's a difficult fucking degree to finish, right? You know, I normally just talk a lot of shit about it, but it is a very difficult degree to finish. So well done for that. And then they end up being doctors, and they work. Now, these people have worked hard for all years of their life up to that point, and then they want to make some selfish decisions for themselves. And I think absolutely they're right? I understand that women want to go part-time. Now, the problem is, if someone goes part-time or works 50% of their full-time time, if you want to cover a spot for, you know, that a doctor would normally work for, you need to get 2 doctors to do that, the same job.
I mean, well, can I just, let me read at least a snippet of the article, because it's sort of spot on what you're saying. This is a professor, a surgeon, and I'm just quoting here. He talks about the gender imbalance. He says, "I fear this gender imbalance is already having a negative effect on the NHS. The reason is that most female doctors end up working part-time, usually in general practice, and then retire early. As a result, it's necessary to train 2 female doctors so they can cover the same amount of work as 1 full-time colleague. Given that the cost of training a doctor is at least 500,000 sterling, are taxpayers getting the best return on their investment? There is another important issue. Women in hospital medicine tend to avoid the more demanding specialties which require greater commitment, have more antisocial working hours, and include responsibility for management." So, I mean, I want to be somewhat sort of merciful to people who might be new here, because all my old-time subscribers, I don't need to explain all this, but none of us are passing value judgment here. And if that's your perception, then, well, whatever, I don't really care. But it's
just observationally true.
It's an observation, but it's still a negative contribution. This tendency of women to take the kinds of decisions they do has been negatively affecting the NHS. Now, the decision itself isn't good or bad, but given a certain structure. I was actually talking to Coltane about this earlier, and just sort of welfare and affirmative action in general. We tend to think of professions like medicine and law and whatever as sort of abstractions. Let's think about like a concrete type of profession, such as sport, football or American football, like the NFL or the NBA. No one would tolerate someone who's just part-time, really, or not willing to give their all. And there's also another thing. That's the fans are demanding. They're the customers. They're paying for tickets. We don't think that when we think about a profession like that, like medicine, we're sort of, well, it's sort of abstract. But the reality is there are certain points of structure in medicine that need to be addressed and attended to. The same has happened on occasion with the lax requirements for becoming a firefighter. And I think we can all agree, at least rationally, that if a man or a woman doesn't meet the requirements, he or she should be out because he or she's endangering him or herself and the people they're potentially rescuing. But there have been documented cases of the standards becoming laxer for firefighters and other sort of life or death professions, and that's just a bad thing. And this is obviously, in the case of medicine, which can be a case of life or death, problematic. And fuck the feminists who say I can't use that, and fuck Sargon who says I can't use that word. So this is in fact problematic, even if the choices being made on the part of women have no moral component to them, but they do have a negative effect on the structure of the NHS, and we need to be honest about that.
I'm being honest with you. Of course, there.
Oh, of course. Oh, I know you are. Yeah. I know I am. But there's all. I mean, I'm trying to be nice to some of my newer subscribers in case they hear this. The idea is to think about this and not sort of give a reactionary, oh, it's all women or whatever. We need to be aware of the fact that you cannot have your cake and eat it too. And this was a surgeon. Now, you can read the article. This is a well-known surgeon in the United Kingdom who wrote this article, saying that, look, the more demanding specialties have gaps in them. People aren't doing them anymore. They need more commitment, and and the cost of it as well. So this is a serious issue. How do you address this?
You can entice more men to do those specialties. Give them more money.
You could do that.
But you can't in an equalist system as it is now.
Actually, man, Colton had a really good idea. Let me tell you and the audience what this idea was. Since it's a public system, right? You could, the NHS at least, you could essentially create a kind of contractual system whereby when you sign on to become a doctor in the NHS, you have to offer at least a 20-year commitment. And so you do that. And if you decide to go part-time when it's not in the contract, or you decide to just leave, like many women do, to procreate, you are guilty of breach of contract, and you have to pay back the money that was invested in you.
Well, the problem with that is, and I'll tell you this for a fact, like me personally, I would never sign that contract. Why would I sign that contract? I think I've already given back enough. I've already paid enough.
Okay, you wouldn't, but I think first, plenty of men would. I mean, let's face it. Most men are busting their balls trying to support their families. I mean, that's what men always do. They would do it. The problem, but this could be a fair way, I think, of regulating the NHS medical field, because then people would, and particularly women, would have to think long and hard about, do I really want to become a doctor? Do I want to do this? Because that's a 20-year commitment, and if I stop that commitment, I'm going to owe them a lot of money. So
that cannot take place. You know that, because in any private company. So, for example, and I'm not supporting the argument here or there because of doctors or anything like that. What I'm saying is, I go into a private company, right? That private company gives me money. I go to university and I get a master's degree because of them, right? That's £12,000 in the UK, right? I do that with one company, then I choose to work for them for a year, and then I leave, right? That's a negative investment for that company. That's a risk they're willing to take, right? That's how they do these things. And in no other, let's say, industry in the world do people have to sign contracts like that. But just because of medicine and because the huge repercussions that are taking place everywhere, people are saying that people should do that. And people have suggested similar things for the NHS, saying that people should at least work on minimum 8 years after graduating in order to give back the investment that the government has put in, or something along those lines. Now, the problem is, you're a highly skilled person. It's not like you did this for free, right? You were paying in as well for your training. That's true. Like everywhere else. So, when I used to do it, when I studied, I think it was 3,000, right, a year, and I was paying for that. And my food and everything like that, I had to get loans for. I had to work for all of these things. People did all of those things, and they started at the same time. Now, why should they be punished more for being, in this profession? And I understand the risk, but and to take it back to the women, right? And the male doctors. If I talk to my female colleague and she's describing to me a situation where, the job is difficult, she wants to start a family, etc. If I'm giving her honest advice, I would tell her to go part-time, right? Because that's the only way she can have a family. There is no other way she can have a family being a full-time doctor.
Nico, I think the fundamental problem is that there's some professions where that's just not as plausible as others. And the medical profession is just too vital to make, frankly speaking, those kind of decisions and say, well, I know I'm needed here, but I'm just going to start a family. It's fine if you're a secretary or you're a photographer or whatever. It's not the same thing, and I think we can agree on that.
I agree that it's not the same thing. I agree. But the patients, the government, they haven't worked for you. You worked for all of these things yourself. Do you owe anything to them? Have you seen anything tangible in your life?
Absolutely not. But then again, it's the nature of the profession.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to be a doctor, and I don't want to be a doctor if I didn't want to, but if you're not willing to give the kind of commitment that's required of being a doctor, why are you becoming a doctor? If you're just kind of interested in reading a bit of anatomy and seeing little kids every now and then, by giving them lollipops and making them smile, but you think there's a huge financial investment in studying all the things that are required to become a doctor is worth doing in order to get to that point in time, I don't know. It doesn't really add up to me.
I absolutely agree. I see this, I understand this, but I also understand from the point of view of a woman how that plays out.
Dude, I understand the woman's point. Yeah. Oh, you know me in female psychology. Yeah. I mean, I understand the woman's point of view too.
If we're looking at it as let's say we are the investors, we're the government, and we're investing money in people. If you know that you need to invest 500,000 in order to make a doctor, in order to produce set number of work, whereas in order to get the same amount of investment, you need to invest, let's say, 750 or 800,000 for 1.8 female doctors, then it's not a good investment. Yes, if you're looking at it from that perspective, absolutely, you're 100% right.
No, exactly.
I never disagreed with you on that.
No, I know, and I get, you want to be nice and, give the female colleagues. I mean, Girl Rights has brought this example up. Sorry, Karen Strawn, I guess she doesn't use it anymore, a million times, particularly in Canada, in her province of Alberta. There's an overabundance of women in sort of cute, cuddly veterinary medicine, bunny rabbits and puppies and kittens. But nobody wants to stick their hand up a fucking horse's or pig's ass. And apparently the wages there are insane. So if you actually wanted to, not say you wanted to, you'd be weird if you wanted to, but if you didn't mind sticking your hand up pigs and horses' asses, you could make a lot of money in sort of farmland veterinary medicine. But, women don't want to do that, so there's a shortage. And I think overall, this is kind of a similar issue to what Teal'c and I talked about in regards to education. If we structure education a certain way and structure society a certain way, and in particular these really vital professions such as medicine, there will be consequences. That is to say, long term, it's almost a certainty that you can't have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. The NHS has been able, and I'm not saying this is the sole problem, obviously. The other things you mentioned about abuse and stuff, and we could talk about women's, let's get in that a bit. That eventually this is going to become a problem. Maybe you could go for it another decade or whatever. But speaking of which, I know we've talked about this before privately, but would you say that women have a greater tendency, based on your observation, to overuse the NHS services?
More women visit the doctor, yes.
Right. But they visit the doctor. Is it for something that's
well, I've already told you that patients are already overusing the services, and if more women are visiting the doctor and there are not more women than men, then they're overusing the services.
Okay, all right, Mr. Christian.
I was just giving you factual observations because I'm not everywhere around the NHS.
Yeah, obviously, but. So I think we need to think about just the whole composition of everything with regards to the NHS and what's contributing to it. I mean, let's be frank though, most doctors in the NHS, particularly if they're reasonably young, such as yourself, would benefit more if they just got up and left the UK, would they not?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I've been trying to tell this guy to head out to Australia and drink taipan juice.
Look, if I'm being honest, there hasn't been a single junior doctor, male or female, who hasn't considered moving to Australia, right? Especially someone who's foreign in this country, has no links to the country whatsoever, like myself. So for me, the thought has crossed my mind, and I have been working. Because, one, I want to give something back to the British government because I understand all of these things. I want to work some time here. The training is not bad here. We're getting taught what we need to be taught. Doctors here are trained very well, very, very well. And they do work a lot, and they do learn a lot at their place of work, right? Degrees in the UK are brilliant, if we're going to be 100% honest. So there is an incentive for that there. But if I'm thinking purely selfish, purely I'm male, I'm young, I have no family, which are the kind of people that they should be aiming to keep in the country, right? Because we're going to be the ones that will be working non-stop, full-time, and, even working overtime for, the family. It's usually men, young men, who are still not invested in any family or anything like that. Anyway, if I'm thinking purely selfishly, then, I'll be better off anywhere else.
Yeah. But I mean, and I think everyone has his breaking point. I mean, there must be some point, at least that you have in your mind, where you're saying, no, this is just too much. Mm. Are we approaching that point for many doctors?
Yes. Well, I've already shown you privately that video of the doctor who quit live on air.
Yes.
On Good Morning Britain, I think it was, one of the shows on ITV. No advertisement there, by the way. He quit live. Many, even older trainees, if you have 7 years of training, I've known doctors who quit on the 7th year of training, 6th year of training, 5th year of training, and they're quitting and leaving. They don't care.
I mean, I think it's just a calculus that you have to make if you reach your own personal limit, right?
Yeah, and it's not just the money, right? It's also having an employer, as they're saying, that doesn't respect you, doesn't care about you, doesn't even listen to you, and believes he or she knows better than you, right?
You're referring to your patients, right?
No, I'm not referring to my patients.
Oh, the doctor. Sorry, the government.
The government, yes. When it comes to managing these patients, and none of them actually has any experience in healthcare.
Right.
So people are leaving because of that. If you think about it, I think people right now, doctors right now, are taking their red pill, right? The equivalent red pill as to what they actually mean to their employer, right? And to the patients all around them, right?
It must be pretty devastating. I mean, in the United States, I suspect most doctors become doctors to make money.
Yeah.
It's not my impression based off of what I've heard from British doctors, but when you're sort of regarded effectively as a kind of indentured servant, which is my sort of outside interpretation, you can only imagine how you feel then, because it's like the government is saying you need to work harder even though you're already busting your ass, all of this stuff. I completely sympathize with these doctors saying, you know what, fuck this, I'd rather deal with the fucking taipans and funnel webs,
Yeah. I mean, all of the doctors, and I'm talking specifically British doctors, right? Because I had no concept of the NHS when I came here. No concept at all. I just started working, and then, I started to understand, and I'm like, oh, this is, a very romantic and great idea that should work. Everyone gets free healthcare. You think about it, if it works, it's brilliant, right? And that's the romantic idea that doctors in the UK went into their training with. It's going to be great. I'm going to be supporting people. I'm going to be respected. I'm going to be in a highly valued profession. And reality is, that's not the case. Your starting salary is exactly the same as a nurse's starting salary, right? That's how it starts. And then it continues to rise. Your starting salary is lower than the underground in London.
Yeah.
It's lower than that, right?
Is it really? So to be a worker in the underground, which is another terrible British service, unfortunately, in London, you make more money doing that?
Yeah, especially when you first qualify. Yes, absolutely. And they get paid for their training. We don't get paid. We lose money. So once you understand all of those things, and then you get the disrespect from your patients, from your employer, which is the government as well, which is what's happening right now. People's hearts are breaking, and you can actually see them. If you put the link for that video that I gave you in the description, you can see this doctor who was feeling so sad, right, about losing this part of his life, that he had to quit in order to fight for what he believed in, right, to fight against the imposition of this contract. He was heartbroken, and you can see it in his eyes, because he had a romanticized view about his job. Most of the doctors in the UK don't look at their profession as just a job.
Yeah, I think, talk about universals here. CS's most recent video on traditionalism, and I've talked about this in the past, about this notion of hope, which I've described as the denial of reality.
Yeah.
This is something, certainly MGTOW-minded men are well aware of, certainly in earlier stages, where you just... And I don't know, for me, it was the whole journey to the red pill was so gradual, and I'd been purple pill for years, so I was already primed for it. But I know in a lot of cases, guys are just making that, and I don't want to talk too much about this, this sort of rapid shift, and they're like, what the fuck? And they just cling to hope, and they just go, and I think this is what's happening in the medical profession. It's this sort of the Hippocratic oath, you're this great healer and whatever. But the reality is it's just another profession involving the government and money and all this other bullshit. And there are a lot of kinks in it. And at the moment, it's pretty fucked up. And
you're a public servant. That's what it is, if we're being 100%.
An ill-treated public servant.
Yes. Look, every doctor will work extra hours. And if you don't, even though your colleagues should not really look down on you, because if you work the documented hours that you're supposed to work, from, let's say, 9 in the morning until 9:30 in the evening, right? Which is a shift that happens for 7 days a week, for a whole week, right? If you work that, you usually work until 10, until 11, and then you do it for 7 days a week. And if you don't do things like that, people look down on you. They mark you down on your training because you're not self-sacrificing enough to be in that training. So people have had this idea that this is how you should be a doctor in the UK, and they haven't looked at it as just a job. I'm contracted to work from here till here. This is how much I'm working. Yeah. And people have increasingly started to look at it as just a job. And following that stage, then they just quit, because if you start looking at it as just a job that just makes you money, I can make more money, much more money, either as a doctor anywhere else in the world, in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, wherever that might be. Or I can just quit and go into other professions. I can be a lawyer. I can, work into a bank and be an investment advisor or whatever. And they pay you a lot more.
Look, at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of people have this notion. Every job is just a job. Some are more tolerable than others. Some are nicer than others. Never been a doctor, but I would never sort of romance myself into the idea that this is something more than a job. Everything is just a job, and it just depends on how much you like it and how much you tolerate it. Well, then again, I'm a Vulcan, so I don't really have these rosy ideals about anything.
I had, you know me, I went into the profession because I wanted to help people. I still want to help people. I still get pleasure from helping people. But it's at what point do you actually break, right?
Well, just be honest, you're certainly considering the possibility of going to a different place where you can earn more money.
Yeah.
As would I in your position, especially, I know I like the UK weather, but most people don't, so.
No one likes the UK weather.
Wouldn't recommend you going to Canada, man. You'll fucking freeze your goddamn balls off.
Maybe you'd probably like Canada.
I've been to Canada many times, and the weather's fine. I think this is just an inevitability, and I'm curious to see how this is going to be resolved. In particular, in connection with the whole Brexit and leaving the EU, because I can definitely see sort of an angle people are going to take when they talk about the current problems. What my feeling, apart from you being an honest doctor here, is that the public and the government are kind of taking this sort of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil approach, where they think, well, if we just put our hands on our ears and not say too much, it'll just sort of solve itself. Somehow. That's my impression looking in from the outside.
The government is thinking we're bluffing. And when you know that...
Well, Nico, here's the thing. It's really funny, though. What I think is that the government is actually sort of threatening you and saying,
Yeah.
you know, look, all these people on their lives are on the line, and if you leave, blah 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 blah.
There is nothing that they can threaten us with. That's what people do not understand, right?
Right.
My degree, as it is one of the most sought after degrees in this country and in any country in the world, right? I will never go hungry. I know that for a fact, right? I have that degree. I will never go hungry. Every doctor knows that. So if they push people where they start understanding that they do not value their profession, they will leave.
And then they're going to import foreign doctors, and some people are going to resent that, and then
they're already resenting that. If you're, I'm being resented all the time because I'm foreign, right?
Right. Yeah. You've actually gotten a lot of shit from the natives because you're not English.
Yeah. So I mean that happens on everyday basis. Now, when you train British doctors, and apparently they like them a lot because, you know, people are generally racist when it comes to these kind of things. I don't know why, but they are. Most of the public is accepting and they don't care, but people have been racist towards me. And, you know, that's how things are. If you train these people, these British doctors, you would want to keep them in the country.
Yeah.
But they're increasingly leaving. I can tell you for a fact, trainees who have worked with me have left. People that I went to med school with, they have left and gone to other countries. I know medical students now because I also teach medical students on occasion that they're leaving and they're not coming into medicine.
Yeah.
That was never an option before. Like, you would never have this kind of discussions with doctors or medical students before. Like, they would want to stay. I'd be the odd one out because I'd be discussing, maybe I'll go and work in Australia, I'll go and work in New Zealand, and they understood it because I had nothing holding me here.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting, but, you know, looking back on the history and having discussed what we've discussed, it shouldn't surprise anyone at this point in time. I think you're going to end up in the land of the kangaroos.
I like Australia. I probably would enjoy it there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you'd like the weather. You could wrestle dangerous venomous snakes.
Yeah, I could be old man and stuff.
You could hang out with Coltrane.
Yeah, we can make barbecues.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I honestly would not want to live in the UK now. It just seems there's just too many problems there right now.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the Brexit thing's an entirely separate issue. I want to make a separate video about it. But, yeah. Anything else you'd like to add?
With regards to what's happening right now?
With the NHS
I think, and this is me being honest, I'm an outsider just working here. I have no vested interest in either party at the end of the day. I'll probably finish my training and go somewhere else anyway. I mean, my plans have no change whatsoever by what's happening. Single man can survive on absolutely no money, right?
Well, not no money,
but yeah, minimal money, right? So for me, you know, the cost is not that great. I've always been fine. I've never, you know, thought, I'm going to run out of money. But
you're essentially sticking around out of a sense of sort of gratitude for the training you receive, which is, I think, quite nice of you.
Well, yeah, it's nice of me, but, you know, I'm also thinking I'm already into the training. I want to just finish it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I have no vested interest on either side winning. But what I'm going to say to anyone listening, especially if we have any British people that are listening, the NHS is collapsing.
Probably do.
Yeah, well, the NHS is collapsing from the inside. Doctors are leaving, nurses are leaving. There are not enough doctors to go around. There are enough nurses to go around anyway. The workforce is disenfranchised. They don't enjoy working there anymore, right? If you just talk honestly with them, they'll probably say, yes, I enjoy working there, but not as much as I enjoyed working there, right? If that would be an honest answer that they would give you. And the NHS will collapse if the people that are staffing it and have mainly been keeping the NHS afloat just by working extra and doing extra just on goodwill, just leave. And this is what's currently taking place. So, enjoy it while it lasts. I predict that it will go down fairly soon.
That will be exciting times. I mean, how that coincides with the Brexit decision and the UK in general, all I can say is exciting times. I hope it's not a dangerous violent collapse. I mean, it's not impossible. Completely unrelated, but I was living in London when the riots broke out. When the hoodlums
I
were
remember the riots. Yeah.
breaking into windows and assaulting. I knew someone who was assaulted, actually. And so it's not an impossibility by any means that when doctors are just leaving en masse and just not working, that there could be chaos, and as a result of that, intense violence, where you probably all need medical care even more. So I guess my prediction is the government isn't that stupid, and so they'll cave and do something. But if not,
they'll sell the NHS it's opening the road to privatization. That's what's happening.
Right.
And that will remove a huge cost for the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, And then the funny thing about that is, how people on the left are going to feel like, oh, you betrayed everything, But human beings are human beings, and they need to have their needs met. And if you're being overworked and not getting enough money, then, frankly speaking, people are going to start rebelling eventually.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, you know what I believe. I believe that people should at least get free healthcare. At least at the point of emergency and all that stuff. You know what I believe with regards to that, emergency treatment. Right. No one should be left without any health care, right? But it's going to change, right? And from the initial plans, which was, I think, for all people to pay something into the system to go and see the doctor, right, to double check their decision. Do you really need a doctor? If yes, give £20 or something like that, right? Now it's going to go to fully private. And I don't know why people think that's worse for us. It's not worse for the doctors. Doctors will make more money if it goes private. But I don't think people realize that we're actually, the doctors and all the junior doctor process and all that stuff that's happening, it's to keep the NHS afloat and to keep a free healthcare system for them.
Yeah. No, it's. Yeah, I think the UK will survive it. It's just gonna look a little bit different at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Which is, it's okay. I mean, things change. Yeah. Everything changes. Life changes. People change. So. All right, well, let me thank my guest, Dr. Nico Chomsky. I will be posting a link to his channel in case anyone is interested in that. By the way, he had a really good chat with C.S. MGTOW. Didn't get too many views, I imagine, but on sort of employment professions and just jobs and work in general and what to do if you're a young man. You should listen to Clive. He's incredibly talented entrepreneur and very wise and savvy in these matters.
Yeah.
So I'll be posting a link to that as well. And everyone, thanks for joining me on this Perspectives.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here. And I guess we can. How do the preppers say it? Let's look forward to the collapse. No, just kidding. It's not going to be pleasant.
No, it's not going to be pleasant.
No. Interesting. May we live in interesting times.
Yeah.